Okay, so I recently shot a video and then it was a short and then I went into detail about condensation in containers. So since that video, everyone's like, oh, my container condensates, and so on. So that prompted me to do quite a bit of research. And so I'm going to now circle back with what I've learned and what I know now because I was speaking based off of my experience in the shipping container industry and seeing containers out here, building containers, and as far as my experience with condensation. A buddy of mine, and this is a good example, texted me that he had a customer with a 40-foot full of boxes full of papers, and that container would condensate, and it was a used 40-foot container, which the containers most prone to condensation would be like used containers that have fewer vents, that have the factory wood floor, and that are a dark color, because the dark color is going to heat up faster in the morning when the dew point's close to the temperature. So I want to circle back on the entire video and basically correct some things I probably simplified and then speak about condensation a little bit more, but not get too in depth. So a spray foam container will not condensate under any circumstance. And the first thing the Chinese have done to combat condensation is they've added polyurethane coating to the wood floor. The wood floor does wick moisture and add humidity to the container across the ocean. So they've added polyurethane coating to the top of the floor. So that's why you now see this polyurethane coating on the top of the floor of most one-trip containers. And I think most people kind of thought, well, it just looks nicer, but there was reasoning behind it. So again, billions of dollars in the container shipping industry, a lot of engineers involved in this, a lot of expensive products. This was one of their solutions, so the wood floor does not wick moisture on the way over from China across the ocean. The other thing they've done is add a lot of vents to all the new containers. So you can see here, new 20-foot container, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've got, sometimes you have vents on the doors, this one does not. So we've got 8 vents on a 20-foot container. The older containers, virtually all used 40-foot containers and 20-foot containers, just have 2 vents. They'll have one here and one on the opposite side on the back of the container. So they've added way more vents. So this is all to combat condensation. And then they knew Americans are using these for storage, and they may not put desiccant packs into the container, which is a product to combat humidity in the air and to prevent condensation. So where all this is going is, if you have a 40-foot used container and you throw a bunch of wood pallets, furniture, papers, cardboard boxes, things like that, into the container, and the vents may or may not be taped up, it does have the potential for condensation. Long story short, I've never witnessed condensation out here on my lot because there are no items or humans inside a container wicking or expelling moisture into the container, i.e. humidity. And so on that morning, we have the dew points at 28 and the temperature is 28, which is when the air is going to condense. I've never witnessed it. The only time I've ever witnessed condensation was in a container with the doors open like this, used container, and let's say it's dark red, sun comes up, hits that container, I would see moisture on the ceiling. So long story short, it's not that people are using containers incorrectly by storing household items in a used 40-foot dark red container. But I would put desiccant packs in that container, and I would make sure that the items are covered in plastic so they're not wicking moisture in and out. And then the shipping companies have also gotten away from just regular wood pallets. They've started using kiln-dried pallets to prevent the wood from wicking moisture into the container in the shipping process over. But no, a container should not condensate. They're engineered to not condensate, but a shipping container should not condensate. So if you have condensation, you need to make sure your vents are clear, add more vents, like these. They're $8 to $10 a piece. Add a solar fan, paint the container a lighter color, look at the products inside, cover those with plastic, whatever you're storing. Make sure those are covered and not intaking moisture and then wicking moisture out. And then the lighter the color, the better, obviously. But my whole point of that initial video was to say that this shipping container office is not going to condensate because we have closed cell spray foam on the wall. We don't need an air gap because this is not going to condensate either way. And then we have an HVAC system which dehumidifies the air. And so when I started that video, it was all about combating the narrative that from a lot of people who saying you can't build anything out of a shipping container because it's going to condensate. It's a pop can. And my point of that video was this container is no different than a metal building like this with insulation. This product's not going to condensate any differently or more than a shed or a metal building and so on. But where I simplified it was saying that shipping containers do not condensate. They can condensate under the right circumstances. So add vents, cover things with plastic and so on, like the other things I've mentioned. So condensation is not a concern for us, especially once we insulate. And so I was speaking with my architect about this as well. And I said, where are you at on spray foam? Because when they build a metal building and use batt insulation, they don't leave an air gap. So they're not concerned about condensation. And a lot of these metal buildings they build with batt insulation don't have HVAC. The air gap is to let the metal condensate and then not get into the insulation. He says, well, once we're using spray foam, none of that is a concern because the spray foam has such an excellent R factor. And he said the recent studies that he's seen puts a 2-inch spray foam at like an R30. So when they say 2-inch spray foam is an R16 or whatever, he said he thinks that's way underrated. And the last thing I'll just touch on is this spray foam in here is not thin. These studs are displaced off the corrugation of the container a bit. I can hole saw through the wall of the container right now, and we're going to have about 2 to 3 inches of insulation coverage, and I'll provide pictures for that. But a spray foam container, even at 1 inch, exceeds the insulation factor of a fiberglass or foam board container by a wide margin. So when we've got 2 to 3 inches average plus the floor, which a lot of companies don't do, we have the best insulated containers on the market by far. I mean, it's not even close. But you're talking about saving, if you were to skimp on insulation in here, to heat and cool this container is probably $300, $400, $500 a year total HVAC electricity bills. So if you're worried about thermal bridging or something like that, that just is so negligible, it's never going to matter. But a closed cell spray foam container is 5x the R factor and quality of any fiberglass or foam board product out there. But condensation is not a factor. If you have a used dark color container with certain paper and household items in it, it could condensate. So I would recommend adding a solar fan, and we do sell those. So go to our website at simpleshippingcontainers.com.